Hello, my name is Fritz Breithaupt. I'm a professor of both Germanic studies and comparative literature and cognitive science at Indiana University in Bloomington, where I run a lab, the Experimental Humanities Lab. And today I want to tell you about my last project, which just appeared in form of a book, The Narrative Brain. So far, only the German version is out, so you don't have to read it. I'll tell you the main finding, the main idea of it, or at least one of the main ideas here. I like to be short. I also want to be to the point, and will give you the 1-minute synopsis up front, and then you can decide whether you want to listen or not. Life is short. In 1 minute, one of the core things we have done in my lab is that we have run serial reproduction studies, telephone games, where we had tens of thousands of people retell stories, and we wanted to see what sticks. So what does stick? And there's many possibilities, but we have one clear finding. It is the intensity of certain emotions, not the words for emotions, but the situations, how embarrassing, how surprising, how happy, or how sad a situation is. That gets transported, and my overall claim then that I will build on it, and has many parts, but the main claim then is that we engage in narrative thinking and narrative reasoning because it rewards us with certain narratives. We get in and out of stories and story thinking and episodes in our life because there's this release function, the rewarding function of emotions. That is the claim that I put in the room, and I will not be modest. I think there's a big theory to be built from this. But this, you've heard the core finding, and from here I will run you through some of the details of it, or reach out to me in any form, or look up some of the publications. So thank you for being here. I'm excited to be part of this conference. Thank you for the organizers. So sad that we don't get to party together. Okay, share screen. This is hopefully working. Okay, so emotional rewards of narratives. Here's the core finding in form of an image. We'll come back to that later on, where we found over time from retelling 1, 2, 3, no major change. This is a published finding, and I'll give you the gist of it and the larger theory behind it. So my core question is really what we as human beings can do, and where our capacity for stories comes into this picture. So one of those aspects is this odd thing that the center of our mind, our consciousness, doesn't have to be in the here and now. I am in an odd hotel room in Berlin right now. You are somewhere else. Plus, this is a recording, also all past. But really, we can put our mind elsewhere too. We can jump into stories. We can mind wander. We can remember an episode, and we can feel as if we would be right there. That I find extremely exciting. There's many words for this capacity. I like to refer to it as the mobility of consciousness here. And I wonder, how does this work? What does it do? How does it shape us as a species or as individuals? There's a second aspect to what kind of maps out the space of what I call the narrative mind or the narrative brain, which is co-experience. As human beings, we are not stuck in our own world. When one of us tells the other one what they have done, then the one who listens, who's the recipient of the story, kind of listens to it, understands it, but really imagines to be in the same place, or at least can imagine to co-experience that. We can transfer experiences from one being to the next. That is amazing. That is truly amazing. And from everything we know, no other species on this planet has mastered this task, at least not to that completion of it. That we're not locked in our mind. We are in a shared space. We do things together and experience things that are past, imaginary things again. And that really is very exciting, and is very interesting, and it's very strange to figure out how this works, and how what needs to be there for this to happen. Of course, we can also, cinema is another one of those options. We can co-experience imaginary things, We are right there in our mind. So my questions are then really what enables this co-experiencing, and also why do we do this? I mean, there are costs with it. Evolution, mind capacities, they never come for free. This requires huge energy and all of that. And my answer for that is very simple. I think narrations enable this. It's the answer to the first question, because we can narrate, we move into other spaces, but the narratives, they also give us something. They reward us for this act of mobility of consciousness. You've already heard the hint. I believe this rewarding has to do with emotions, but I'll walk us to that now. This is where we go into a little bit slower paced. So in the research I want to present today, one of the 3 columns of my overall finding here is that I want to examine what aspects are relevant in narrative thinking and what are narratives in that concept. I will use telephone games here as a method of investigation for today, and more particular, I will ask when we have change of retelling stories, of information. I want to ask what remains stable, what gets dropped, what gets changed or invented, or here's an image. You can see that in some cases when one person talks to another, then to the next, sometimes things remain stable. We know there's certain myths and certain mythological or religious connotations where there's a high stability and so on. Lots of things decay, but then innovations happen too. And we use this approach with storytelling to see, well, what actually is the core of storytelling? There's a classical study to this that has started this kind of an investigation, which is from Frederick Bartlett, a psychologist who coined this, or shaped at least, he didn't invent it, this idea of serial reproduction 100 years ago. And he used as an example an owl that was kind of repainted by people. They see it, it disappears, they repaint it from memory. And then one person, there were a couple of people, they just made this fluffy animal with ears. And then at some point, someone interprets this image as cat. And once it's cat, it remains stable, 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 stable. Cat is stereotypical. So his claim was that the rational form, the stereotypical form, is that what remains. And then he also did experiments with storytelling very famously, and claimed that it's also the stereotypes that remain and the causal change, why someone is doing something. He said that is the core of the story, that will remain and everything decays. And he tested this and other people came to the same result. There was, however, a problem, which is that his starting story was an odd story, a mythologically foreign story, Native American story from North America, where things did not make sense for the participants of his research study in England. There was magic in it, weird things, they didn't understand the context. So when they were retelling it, they retold the things that made sense to them. So that's not so surprising. So he could observe an increase in rationalization and causality, but only because he used this awkward starting story. In most story communication, I would guess more than 99%, we retell stories that are more familiar to us. Even Hollywood movies that follow schemes we already know, they tend to be things that are accessible to us, not foreign stories that make very little sense. So we decided to redo these studies, and I won't go into the details here, in 2 ways, where we asked people to tell us a story, or we ourselves produced stories, short stories. We accepted all of them, had large numbers, and used 3 iterations, 3 generations of retelling. Each time the instruction was just, please retell the story in your own words. And we didn't exclude anything in this, and we used high numbers in it. We had 18,000 retellings. We had 16,000 participants in the study, or several studies together here to decide what remains. We evaluated every single story by human beings that turned out to be better than any automatic thing. So people rated for us, how happy is the situation, how sad is the situation, basically the emotion, the intensity of emotions. We had 3 questions about causality and rationalization, and we had quality questions in it too. And then we wanted to see, how does this evolve over time? and I will cut to the chase here, I will not go into the analysis. We notice that and you see the red circle, for markers of rationalization or causality, we'll use the 3 ones that Bartlett had identified. There's a decline. On the graph you see from left to right, that's a transition from original story, first, second, and third generation retelling. On the y-axis is the intensity, and on the cleaned up version that I'm circled here, you see there is the big line, the trend line is going down. Not horrible. Rationalization is important, no doubt, but it's not so stable. Quality of the stories goes down, or boringness goes up as expected. But then we find these things. We find that the rating, how sad the situation of the story is, or how happy it is, how happy it is, remains. Look again on the left side here, on the left lower side, parallel lines, nothing changes. The trend line is horizontal. High sad stories remain high sad after retellings, low sad remains low sad, and so on and so on. And that is highly surprising because the stories change drastically. They go down from 15 sentences, somewhere there, 12 to 15 sentences, to 3, maybe 4 sentences. Lots of stuff gets dropped. Everything, lots of the changes happen there. I won't go into the details here. You can look it up in the publications. Embarrassment, the trend line also remains very flat. However, some emotions go down. Disgustingness, whoops, goes down. No one likes to, in our study, you could change this, but disgustingness is not what people pass on. Here's an example. I won't have time for it, but you can freeze this video and read it. First and third retelling, very funny. Here, the overall claim then, unreadable, it's in German, sorry, is that we say what happens in story retelling is that people condense a story in memory to one core emotion. This is on the left side of the graph, the original. And then in the retelling, they start with that emotional value. They pick or select or invent story details that would explain such an emotion to reproduce it. So it's an emotion-focused or affect-focused form of retelling. We claim that is the process of how stories get retold, how stories get remembered, and how we make sense of stories and make sense of the world that we see embedded in stories. There's more specific claims here that I will not go through here now. Lots of interesting things that you can read in other studies. So I'll show you the slides. So if you want to read it, you can take it. So here comes the claim. Why this focus on emotions and retelling? Why is it that the emotions are so important for us? We know that emotions stick to memory in other studies too, of course, but why? Why really? And here's my claim. This is an hypothesis, so I cannot 100% verify this with our studies, or at least there's support, but not more. Namely, that emotions are rewarding our narrative thinking. We see that, and I think there's 2 points coming together here. Many emotions are positive, but there's something we want out of it, and I'll give you a list in a second. There's a second point. The emotion signals to us that the episode has come to an end. The happy end is reached. Even the sad end is an ending point, which means that we get to withdraw, and remember the mobility of consciousness, we get to withdraw consciousness and return to ourselves. We've done our work in the story, we're getting to come back. And in the best case, in many cases, we are taking something with us, namely this emotional resolution of the story. That is my claim here. Here's a couple of examples of such emotions. Triumph. Half of Hollywood, all these Avengers movies and superhero movies, erotic fulfillment. Finally, people are coming together. Something is happening. Satisfaction. Think of William Flesh's book, Comeuppance. Everyone gets what they deserve. Even the punishment of the bad guys is a reward for us. There's aesthetic emotions like astonishment as a reward for curiosity. Something's happening that we didn't expect. Feeling being moved. This is again an aesthetic emotion. Resolutions, sublime surprise also has a reward in us. First, it's disintegrating, but then there's a new whole coming together, a new world is coming together. Therapeutic effects, especially important for collective narratives here, where we know something is ending and we are over it, we are healed from it. And that can be also in the case of disasters like the 9/11 collective narrative of memorialization, where the narrative itself solved something for us and helped us to overcome a traumatic event. That is basically as far as I think I can go here, and without going over too much in time. There's other aspects here, the grim fairy tales, where I believe something interesting happens, where also an emotional value gets stabilized, namely vulnerability. Vulnerability of the heroes, in this case, gets rewarded. The more vulnerable characters are, the more they get rewarded in the end. There's a formula here too, just hinting at that here briefly. But I will end my talk here. There's more things, of course, to consider. There are other columns of what shapes narrative thinking. This is a lot. There are lots of research questions. There's the question of multiversionality, where we think about more than one thing that could happen. Every reader of literature knows this effect, but I think it's also an everyday effect. And there's some other possibilities of things we need to consider here. But for us here, the conclusion for me here today is that we cultivate narrative thinking since it rewards us with emotions, and the emotions then also allow us to give us an endpoint. We have accomplished what we needed to do in a story or in an aspect of our life that we narrate to ourselves, and then we lead that way. Thank you very much. I'm looking much forward to the conference, and I'm looking forward to any questions. Please also just reach out via email and all these kind of things. Or if you want to know more about the lab and want to get involved, let me know. Thank you very much.